Hello there, welcome back to the British Food History Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Neil Buttery, food historian and chef. This is the second part of my two-part special all about Robert Burns and Burns Night, which is celebrated on Robert Burns' birthday, 25th of January, but is often marked on the Saturday closest to that date, which is today, if you are listening on the day this episode has gone out. So, if you're readying yourself for a Burns supper today or tomorrow, I hope this episode gets you even more into the celebratory spirit. And if you're not marking Burns Night, well, hopefully, after listening to this, you will be inspired to get yourself some haggis, neeps, tatties, and a dram of whisky. Hopefully, a man of words single malt from the excellent Annandale Distillery. Why? Well, you are about to find out. Today's episode is a jam-packed one, where I speak with three guests all about Robert Burns and his links with Dumfriesshire, southwest Scotland. First of all, I speak with Jane Brown, Honorary President of the Robert Burns World Federation and ex-manager of the Globe, Robert Burns' favourite haunt when he lived in Dumfries in the last 8 years of his life. Jane has attended and spoken at many Burns nights all around the world, so there's no one better to talk with about Burns' life, which has several links with food and drink. We already know from the first episode that there's Burns Night and the address to a haggis, but there's also his time as an exciseman, plus there's all the time he spent at the Globe, which contains many precious artefacts and has been painstakingly conserved by owners Teresa Church and David Thomson, who are my other two guests for this episode. Here's what the Globe website says about David and Teresa. Professor David Thomson, scientist, businessman, founding chairman, MMR Group, and single malt enthusiast, was born and raised in Dumfries. His family associations with the town reach back over many generations. Teresa Church is a scientist and businesswoman, also a founding director of the MMR Group, whose association with the town of Dumfries stretches back over 40 years. Before purchasing the Globe, David and Teresa had previously acquired the derelict Annandale Distillery in 2007, successfully returning it to full production in 2014. Teresa is keenly interested in the restoration of historic buildings, including Annandale Distillery and most recently the Globe Inn. Now, they contacted me when I included their single malt whisky Man of Words in my Taste of Britain series for Country Life to thank me. One thing led to another, and we decided to make an episode of the podcast about Burns in Dumfriesshire. I spent an evening with them and Jane Brown, plus some of David and Teresa's family at the Globe, inside which is their restaurant 1610, so called because the Globe first opened in that year. It's a fantastic restaurant with very delicious food, I do have to say. The Annandale Distillery produces a delicious and unique single malt whisky. It's available unpeated, and it's called Man of Words, after Robert Burns. And the other is peated and called Man of Sword, after the other local historical figure associated with Dumfries, Robert the Bruce. Like the Globe, the old distillery was saved and beautifully conserved and brought back to life by David and Teresa. So as you can see, there's a lot to discuss today. I will save my news for the end, which includes, by the way, a free online talk with the Museum of Royal Worcester. Right, let's get started, shall we? In today's episode, we talk about Burns's before and after dinner graces, Burns' penchant for scratching poetry on windows, the importance of cask size on the flavour of whisky, and just what exactly possessed David and Teresa to buy both the Globe and a falling down distillery, amongst many other things. As I said, I'll fill you in on my news at the end, but now please enjoy the Globe Inn and the Annandale Distillery with Jane Brown, Teresa Church, and David Thomson. When I arrived in a rather drizzly Dumfries in December 2025, Jane Brown took me on a wonderful Robert Burns tour of Dumfries. We saw many sights. There was the Globe Inn, the Burns House, which has some excellent kitchen artefacts, by the way, as well as the statues of Robert Burns and his wife, Jean Armour. We sheltered from the drizzle, and it was a good opportunity for me to ask how Jane became interested in the life and poetry of Robert Burns.
We got given Burns at school, and my father enjoyed Burns, would sing and recite poetry. And then I moved away and worked away, but when I came back to Dumfries, because he's here, I put my name down to join the Burns Club. Ended up joining the Dumfries Ladies Burns Club #1. And from there you go, I became president, and then I became a member of Dumfries and Galloway Burns Association. And in the meantime, I got working at the Globe Inn, the famous Globe Inn where Burns frequented, and then I became manager of the Globe Inn, which enhanced my knowledge and my interest, because the club attached to the Globe is the Burns House Club, and I would work all their dinners and I would hear all their eminent speakers, etc. So it was like a sponge. And then I became president of Dumfries and Galloway Burns Association, and from that you go on to going to the Robert Burns World Conference, and I was nominated to become junior vice and eventually president of the Robert Burns World Federation. So that opened so many doors for me. So I'm seeped in Burns now so much I can't get away from it, and every day I put 4 lines of Burns on Facebook just to keep people engaged with Burns, which I started in COVID and still going strong.
I know about Burns, like most people know about Burns. They know a little bit, so they associate him with his poetry, with Dumfries, but also he spent a lot of his time in Edinburgh. But one thing that I was not aware of was when he moved here, because he spent the last
9 years.
9 years of his life here, he moved to a farm.
He moved to Ellisland Farm.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it was a bad choice because the crops were bad, the ground was stony, so it wasn't very economically viable for him there. And he took the job with the excise to supplement initially, and then gave the farm up and moved into Dumfries. And his poetry and his works were starting to become famous as well and getting printed. So he had an income a little bit from that, but the excise was a better income than the farm, worrying about the farm and the crops and things every year. So it was a bad choice of farm that he picked, but it is a lovely area and a lovely farm even now as a visitor centre. It's very nice.
It's strange to imagine that it was so highly regarded in his own lifetime, and many poets aren't. So you would just assume that
he could make enough,
money from the poetry.
Unfortunately not.
No. It seems to me that the Globe Inn is the focus of Burns' time in Dumfries, so I was keen to know more about its history and links with Robert Burns.
He would use the Globe as a stopping point from going home to Ellisland, because he would ride perhaps 200 miles on a pony in a week with his excise duties. So making his way back to Ellisland would sometime be impossible with snow, etc. And there was no gritters and 4x4s in those days. So he would lodge at the Globe on occasion and became very friendly with the landlords, Meg and Jock Hislop. And when he moved to Dumfries, he still would frequent the Globe, because that was, he called the Burns House. And House, Howff, is an old word for his favourite haunt, his favourite place to go.
Yes, he really got to know people there very, very well. Didn't he have a grace that
Yes, he
name-checks
had
them?
before and after dinner grace. The before dinner grace is, O Lord, since hunger pinches sore, do thou stand us instead, and send us from thy bounty's store a tup or a wither head. So obviously, if to get his dinner that night, it was sheep's head or something like that he'd be having. And the after dinner grace, he mentions the landlords, O Lord, since we have feasted thus, which we so little merit, let Meg now take away the flesh, and Jock bring in the spirit.
Oh, very nice.
So he mentions Meg and Jock Hislop, but he also had an affair with Anna Park, the landlord's niece in the Globe. And she gave birth to a baby girl 9 days before his wife Jean gave birth to a son. But she couldn't cope. She moved to Edinburgh and couldn't cope with the child and work. So I believe that was the reason the baby was brought back to Dumfries. And Jean Armour, his wife, most compassionate lady, brought the baby up with her own children.
Gosh.
to the extent where they were still in her life as an adult. It's like a daughter to her.
Gosh, there are not many people who would do that.
No, there is
Fair
not.
play to you. You can see where there's a statue of her as well as Robert Burns.
Exactly.
Yeah, what a woman. What a woman. When he was an excise officer, it seems like you were quite hands-on as an excise officer. You were physically going down to get...
In Annan, there was the Rosamond's.
The Rosamond, that's it, yes.
The Rosamond and the Rosamond's Canon. He wrote a poem about that. And he was actually involved physically to try and get these smugglers.
Physically?
Yeah.
Intercepting. I guess it's things that they're bringing from
sword
the New
out,
World.
etc.
Yeah.
I believe he was involved physically, sticking up for himself.
Rum and sugar and things like that from the West Indies.
Yes,
and those sorts
this
of
was
places.
a lot of mud flats in the Solway, so there was lots of chance for smugglers, to get the goods out up. Very busy in this area because this is a very busy port down the Solway coast. 20,000 odd people emigrated from these shores to foreign parts like America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, as well as the ships could come right up and into the port. And the river here in the Dumfries, we had little tender ships that would go out to the bigger clipper ships and bring the goods up the river here. For the Globe to be able to sell port from Portugal and claret wine from France, all came in by sea.
Yes, you wanted your port. That was a favourite drink, wasn't it, at this period? When it comes to a Burns Night celebration, the most important food item is the haggis and the recital of Burns's address to a haggis. But what informed the writing of it in the first place?
There's a story about the haggis. I don't know if it's true, but they reckon that when Burns was in Edinburgh, he was invited to entertain the hierarchy at one of their dinners. But he wasn't invited to the dinner. He was told to enter by the servants' entrance. And he had his meal with the servants, which was haggis. So this, to get his own back at the lords and ladies, etc., he wrote, instead of address to fricassee and the French delights that they were eating, he wrote the address to the haggis instead. And it was more or less a go at the hierarchy to say, I wasn't good enough to join you, but I was good enough to come and entertain you.
Yes, yeah.
So it's sort of dig at them, if you know what I mean. Because one of the verses is there for out his French ragout, or olio that stow a sou, or fricassee that mak you spew with perfect scunner, looks down with sneer and scorn for you and sick a dinner. So they were looking down on their haggis because they'd had their French ragout and their fricassee.
Are you a haggis fan, by the way?
Well, I don't eat haggis from one Burns season to the next. Okay. I start off with great vigour, and then by the 30th Burns supper in March, I can't look at it.
Yeah, fair enough.
And then I don't eat it again till the following year. But I'm a connoisseur, for sure, of haggis, definitely. I've eaten it all over the world. Some of it has been blooming awful. I don't know who made it, but others have been quite good considering they don't get the same ingredients. Like they won't put lung in and things like that. Yeah,
that's right.
So yes, I've eaten haggis all over the world and I've addressed it all over the world. It's a wonderful address.
Later in the day, Jane and I met up again along with David Thomson and Teresa Church, as well as some of their family and friends at the Globe Inn. We had a very delicious meal. I can still taste that venison with the blackcurrant jus. But whilst we waited for the puddings to arrive, Jane and Teresa gave me a quick tour of the place to point out some of its treasures. We began at the little snug or tack room, which you see as soon as you walk in through the Globe's doors.
The stables is where we're sitting, and this would have been the tack room in Burns's time, where they would have hung the saddles, bridles, everything pertaining to the horses. It's now the wee snug bar, as you can see now.
Breathe in.
Occasionally this would be a little impromptu. Somebody would start singing, or a fiddle would get pulled out on a Sunday afternoon or something. It was always a lovely wee atmosphere in here. It says, what they call this, it says, kitchen.
So this is the kitchen.
And as you can see, we've got the original kitchen range here with the swee on it. Isn't it lovely what
It
they've
is
done?
lovely, the hot plates.
The hot plate and the meat hooks up here in the ceiling.
Oh, yes.
You still see them. And the old-fashioned serving jugs that would be filled up from vats of mead, port, claret wine. If you come through here, this is the original bar area. So the panelling on the wall all dates back to 1780 when Burns was here. And this actually belonged to Robert Burns, this table. And the pièce de résistance, of course, is the poet's chair, which we just walked past. So you go and have a seat in it.
Okay. I'll show back up. Oh, lovely book.
And when you sit in it, there's a custom attached. You have to recite a little something from Burns, although you can cheat and have a little script here of different verses. And if you don't recite it, then you have to buy everybody in the pub a drink.
Well, I'm from Yorkshire. So I'll be reciting it.
You can pick anyone you want.
Oh my gosh. Some have meat and cannot eat. Some cannot eat that want it. But we have meat and we can eat. So let the Lord be thanked.
Amen. Well done.
Thank you.
I actually say it in English.
It's all, well, that's how I read it.
Until
the last line.
Some hay meat and can eat.
And
some hay meat that want it. But we hay meat and we can eat, so let the Lord be thanked.
Oh, let's see, that's how it's
That's
done,
how it's
isn't it?
done.
That's how it's done. Oh, we can't go
And the
away.
haggis is, fair for your honest sonsie face, great chieftain of the pudding race. Aboon them all you tak your place, painch, trite or thern. Weel are ye worthy o' a grace, as lambs my heir.
Fantastic.
But isn't it lovely? There's an atmosphere to this room, definitely.
There really is an atmosphere
Yeah,
to this room.
it's
And
fabulous.
the fact that our voices are sort of resonating as we're
Yes,
talking from
yeah.
the panelling.
Yes,
Well, we
so-
do lovely little private dinners in here, and you can really, I always think you can feel the presence in a way. What happens is some people come along and they have an individual tasting dinner, 9, 10 courses, with the drink that goes with them, and it all gets explained to them.
Yeah.
But they get met by a piper coming up the close. They get a little drink to start with. I'm dressed up as Jean Armour, and then they get a tour, and then they come down for this wonderful tasting dinner. And in between each course, I come in and tell them a few stories, and it's all part of the experience roundabout to the desserts. And then I give them that time, and they end up with the keys to the whisky cabinet. So they have a wonderful night.
Do you get your sheep's head and haggis as one of your
not quite-
courses?
Yeah, get haggis, yes.
Get
but
haggis, not sheep's head.
Not sheep's head.
Well, that's a
no.
shame.
Yeah. So we sort of renovated this room. So it took quite a lot of effort to get it back to its sort of original.
Yeah.
Although it looks quite basic, it took quite a while to get all the different things to be authentic.
Upstairs we went to see Burns's bedroom. The period kitchen and old bar were atmospheric enough, but the atmosphere in this room, well, you will hear, was staggering to me.
This is lovely, the way they've put it back to how it was.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't this stunning?
This is beautiful. Oh, the basin.
I know.
Little wash
They've kind of
basin.
tried to put it back to how it was.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Now, this is where he had the affair with Anna Park.
Oh, yes.
But he still managed to write to her, yes, Strina had a pint of wine, a place where body sauna. Yes, Strina lay on this breast of mine, the gowden locks of Anna. Come in thy raven plumage night, sun, moon and stars withdrawn, and bring an angel pen to write, my transport's way, my Anna. Lovely work.
It's so beautiful.
But he was famous for writing on glass. And here we have one. I don't know if you've got your phone torch on you.
I do in a sec. I can do.
Right, up here. See up the top?
Yeah.
Oh, lovely Polly Stewart. Oh, charming Polly Stewart. There's no a flower that blooms in May that's half so fair as thou art. And the other one here. Gin a body, meet a body coming through the grain. Can you see it?
I can see it, yeah.
Gin a body, kiss a body, the things a body's ain. They are original, authenticated
originals.
etchings by Robert Burns.
Holy.
That's such a gift, isn't
that really
it?
is.
Really precious. But what they've done with this room is just wonderful.
It's
the way it
just
looks.
steeped in emotion,
It
isn't
is.
it? We walked past the clattering kitchens and into the very quiet and peaceful private dining room. A good opportunity to quiz Teresa about just why she and David decided to take on the globe. I guess at some point this came up for sale for you two, and you leapt upon it. Why on earth did you think it was a good idea?
The family here, David knew them very well, the Macaros, because David grew up in this period, in this area. And they kept saying, "Oh, do you want to buy the globe?" And we said, "No, thank you." And then we came one night and it was quite rowdy in here, and we thought, all these artefacts of Burns, are they being cherished? Mm-hmm. And the Burns rooms weren't really Burns rooms at that point, were they?
You had a Christmas party and you could see from me the passion.
Absolutely.
And I really got to them, didn't I, in a way that to show them what we still had.
Yes.
Not knowing that they were thinking of buying it, but they weren't.
We weren't. And then I woke up at 3:00 in the morning and I said to David, I think we have to buy the globe to preserve all the Burns artefacts and the history, and as you explained to us how valuable it was and how authentic it was. This is where he spent a lot of his working life, his highly productive years here in Dumfries, and he died here. Mm-hmm. So it was a very important part of his life, and he was very productive during that period, wasn't he?
And the present owner then, his grandfather had made a stipulation to say if you sold it, it had to be somebody that kept as custodian of those artefacts. Mm-hmm. And that's why they were all included in the sale and everything.
Yes.
David and Teresa are carrying on such a legacy and leaving such a legacy to the town. Really. It's amazing.
Off we went to our puddings and then to our beds. Next day, I had a tour of the Annandale Distillery and tasted the manor words, the name, an homage to Robert Burns. I managed to corner David and Teresa to find out more about the history of the distillery, why they took it on, and how they went about creating a unique whisky when there are already a lot of single malts on the market. What kind of thing sort of spurs you on and makes you think, this is a good idea?
Well, I would like to give you a totally rational explanation, but I don't have one to give you.
We work for the food and drink industry in our other business, MMR, and we did a lot of liquid development and branding development, haven't we? And David got to be really interested in the whisky side of things, didn't you?
Yeah. Being an expatriate Scot living in England, there's a sort of assumption that you must drink whisky, which of course I do to a limited extent. But of course it became something, it kind of one of these things that grew. It became, well, you have to be able to represent that by having a decent selection of single malts in your cabinet at home. And it sort of started growing from that point. And then you get interested in the history of, I'm the sort of person that would get interested in, why is Scotch whisky the biggest spirit category in the world, or brown spirit category in the world? Why has it got there? How's it produced? Etc. etc. So all these things intrigued me from a historical, but also from a scientific and technical point of view as well. So that grew with no thought of ever owning a distillery. It just wasn't in the thought process at all.
But it sort of started with birthday presents. You got books, didn't you?
So, from you, yeah.
So David got whiskey books from me, which was quite a good present. And then I used to buy, then I bought you a cask, didn't I, at
Tullybarton cask from my 50th birthday.
Yes. And then I bought you a gift as going to Kilhoman on a whiskey course, didn't I?
Yeah,
whiskey making course. Yeah. And then we sort of heard of this place and we went and visited and we fell in love with it because it was the only one time we ever saw sunshine at Annandale. It was that day, wasn't it?
It was. I beg your pardon. I think sunshine's a lot more here, but anyway, it is rather wet. I can see that point.
And we just fell in love with the romance of it. And I said to David, it's not now, it's never.
Yeah. But it sounds like it was now or never, because if you hadn't taken it on, it just would have been so...
I think it would have collapsed by now. It would have collapsed by now.
It was about to collapse.
And the thing was that although it hadn't been cared for by the people that owned it, because they were just buildings that they used and they had no particular interest
farm
in
buildings.
Them. Yeah, just used them as farm buildings. the good side of that is they hadn't messed them about too much, so you could see everything was pretty much as it should be. There was one building that had been demolished, but apart from that, and the archaeologists were able to show us what it would have looked like. So it was easy. It became relatively easy to take it forward and make it into a distillery of the modern era without being too modern.
So the buildings were one sort of interest because it's made of beautiful sandstone. That was a really nice project, reconstructing the distillery and adding other bits that fitted in well. But then we decided, well, what sort of whisky do we want to make?
Well, that was going to be my next question, because there's lots of nice whiskies around, and, how do you make yourself different, unique compared to everybody else?
Well, I think there's one thing we should add before we go into that,
right.
and that is there are a lot of distilleries in Scotland. At that time, there were about 100 single malt distilleries in Scotland. But if you look to the south of Scotland, where we are, at that point there were none at all. And there never had been many. There had only ever been 4 in the very south of Scotland: Bladnoch, Annandale, Langham and Glentarris. Langham and Glentarris went before the First World War. Annandale went after the First World War. And Bladnoch had a sort of charmed, checkered life all the way through until the late 1980s, and it was closed. And then it got bought over by somebody who did a sort of sterling job at keeping it alive. But then that all went to the on the rocks. Now it's back in production again. But anyway, the whole point being, it then became a sort of mission to bring single malt whisky production, Scotch whisky production, back to the south of Scotland, because at that point in 2007 there was nothing.
Well, we went to visit Bladnoch, didn't we, when it was Mr. Armstrong's place, and I actually bought you a book, Scotch Mist.
MISSED, lovely play on words, and it was about the distilleries that had closed.
And Annandale was in it, and we looked at Annandale and it said dissembled, so we thought it had gone. It didn't exist.
Misread it really as dissembled, meaning demolished, but actually it just meant that all the equipment had been stripped out of it. It was owned by Johnny Walker at that time, and we don't know whether they took the equipment away and took it to Cardew Distillery, which they also owned at that time, or whether they just scrapped it and got rid of it. But anyway, there was nothing left, but the buildings were, I would say, even now, they were in better shape than we realised, in the sense that everything was actually there, and so we could make sense of it. And when we were thinking about repairing it, but to go back to the question of this, at that time there were 100 distilleries. How do you do something unique? And this is where our other business kicked in, because MMR, our main business, is the biggest, if you like, purveyors of sensory research in the world. We manage 46 trained sensory panels in, I think it's like 7 or maybe it's 9 countries. I can't quite remember now. So this is a huge part of our lives and what we do.
In our other business.
So we help our clients, for example, if somebody's making a particular type of biscuit and they want to know how it compares to their competitors, not just whether people like it more or less, but how the sensory characteristics differ, its appearance, its smell, its flavour, its texture, its aftertaste and so forth. And we thought, well, we could do that for whisky. So what we did is we looked at at the beginning it was about 65 single malts, just off the shelf, nothing fancy, just regular off the shelf whiskies, but covering a broad spectrum of the sensory universe of single malt Scotch whisky.
That's what we do for our clients when we investigate where there's a gap in the market.
Yeah, so that's what we're going to do. We did some what we call sensory gap analysis. So we looked at these, eventually brought it down to 35 that represented the universe rather well. And then the trained panel developed a sensory vocabulary to describe the sensory characteristics. And then they measured the amount of these sensory characteristics in each of the whiskies. That gives you data, quite a lot of data that you can map, and you can produce a map. And what you then look for are the location of all the other whiskies that were there, and the sensory characteristics that characterise them, and then where are the gaps. Now, of course, a gap can be a chasm. There might be a reason why there's nothing there, but there was a big gap in the map, in the peated side of the map, because of course there's peated and unpeated whiskies, and the peated side, there's a big gap. And what you can do with these maps, which are quite sophisticated, is you can point to anywhere and say, if there was a whisky there, what would its sensory profile be? And by reverse engineering the statistics, you can find that out. And one of the other criteria we were applying, because we always wanted to make both peated and unpeated whisky, so we looked at the other side of the map, the unpeated side of the map, beg your pardon, and said, is there another gap there? And there was. It wasn't so distinctive. And so what we were able to do then was to find a gap in the unpeated side and the peated side where they sort of matched. Now, obviously, they're going to be different because one's peated and one's unpeated, but they had something in common. So there was a family resemblance. And that's what we were able to do.
I see.
We were then able to check that we could produce that whisky, not by making it, by other means, and then testing it with whisky consumers. And we realised that it is different from other whiskies, and people, very importantly, that people liked it. And that gave us the confidence to say, well, we can do something that's a bit different and people will recognise it, but it's still part of the universe of single malt Scotch whisky.
But we designed a plant with help from Jim Swan, who's a
and
genius.
Richard Forsyth at Forsyth and
Yes.
Brothers.
So Jim sort of guided us in how the plant should operate and the shape of the stills and everything.
They're very beautiful.
They
those
are,
stills.
yeah, they
And
are,
to have two stills so that you
spirit stills, yeah.
Yeah, 2 spirit stills to make it a purer whiskey, taking out the sulfur compounds. And other distilleries can't reverse engineer the plant based on the sensory profile, but only because we've got that experience in our other business could we do that.
We couldn't have done that in terms of the plant for making whisky because neither of us had the experience of doing that. But we worked with somebody who had been an acquaintance of ours for many years, way before we were ever interested in making whisky, a guy called Dr. Jim Swan. And he had this unique talent of being able to sort of taste a whiskey, and he would, in his mind, be able to start thinking about the plant would have created that whiskey. I mean, it's even more than, you think of wine connoisseurs and they can say, well, that is that's from the left bank of such and such a valley or something. Now he'd be thinking about the mash tun and the stills and the fermentation process to actually achieve that. And so with his expertise and also the expertise of Forsyth of Rothes, who make all the equipment, and we give them a very detailed and precise sensory specification. So if you put all these things together, you can do it. And there's a very useful expression in Scots that says, "Monia mickle max a muckle," which means in English that lots of small things can add up to something that's quite big. And that's very true of the actual whisky making process. There are lots and lots of little things, or apparently little things, that can end up having a profound effect on the character of your whisky. And what our ambition was to do was to have this unique character for Annandale, and we call it Annandale-ness. And it's a bit of a lumpy expression, but it's what it is. It's the bit that makes Annandale whisky distinctive from everything else. It's subtle, but all our whisky should be characterised in that way.
And the fact that we have a smoky and a non-smoky, and they sit together with that identity is very pleasing, isn't it?
I think so, yeah.
We've talked a lot about Robert Burns, but we've got Robert the Bruce as well, which we have to talk about, whose whisky is Man o' Sword.
Correct.
Got Man o' Words, Man o' Sword. Who noticed the sword words thing?
Well,
whoever it was must have been very pleased with themselves
but
that
we
day.
also do branding.
Yeah.
Don't forget, we also a company that does branding.
Well, I'll tell you how it happened, Neil, because it is quite an interesting story. It's not suddenly a shock brainwave, but so in Dumfries here, Robert, at the time of the beginning of the early 1300s, late 1200s, there was no Scottish king. There had been a king called John Balliol, and he was known as Toom Tabard, Empty Tabard. He was a vassal king for Edward I, and he got chucked out, and the throne was empty. And there were really several contenders to the throne, but the two I suppose, that had the most right to be king were Robert the Bruce, or Robert de Bruce as he was, or Norman, and his cousin John Comyn, otherwise known as the Red Comyn because of his red beard. Now, these people didn't like each other. These two guys were not very close as cousins. And they both thought they were equally right to be king. So Bruce and the Red Comyn met in Greyfriars Abbey.
Which is 100 or 200 yards from here.
Yeah. So they met in Greyfriars Abbey to try and sort it out, and they didn't. And a furious row broke, and Bruce drew his sword and he struck his cousin down. And Bruce's compatriot, a guy called Kirkpatrick, drew out his ski and do from his sock and stabbed the John Comyn in the heart and said, "I'll make sicker," which means I'll make sure. And that was the end of him. But they did it in a church, which is not a terribly good idea. No. So he got excommunicated by the Pope. He was eventually readmitted to the church by Bishop Wishart of Glasgow. But anyway, that is a time where people lived and died by the sword. So that's where the sword bit came from. And then, of course, you can think of Bruce as a warrior king because he led the Scots to defeat the English army at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. So there's all that sort of information, and he was a warrior king. So the idea of sword warrior king, because although people all around the world won't necessarily know of Robert the Bruce, the idea of a warrior king is quite interesting.
Universal.
It's universal. That's exactly the right expression as well. And then, of course, everyone would say, I think, that Robert Burns was a man of words. He was a linguist. I mean, how did a poor farm boy become so linguistically capable? He definitely spoke Scots and English, which were not the same language at that time, a bit like, I suppose, Dutch and German are now. He spoke other languages as well. Where did all that come from? He was a literary genius. He was a word genius. So he was words and Bruce was sword, and it just so happens that we spotted that they're anagrams of each other. And I really like that, because I think if you're going to use something in a branding like that, it's got to be meaningful. It can't just be something that somebody's thought of. It has to have deep meaning. And of course, Bruce was the 7th Lord of Annandale. And Burns was he was based in Dumfries as an excise officer, but some of his patch, if I could call it that, was Annan. And it's well recorded. He wrote the deals a while with the exciseman when he was boarding in Annan, when he was working there. So the connection of the two. I mean, we claim justifiably, I think, ownership of these two Scottish icons, and so we want to perpetuate that. And one of the nicest things is when we fast forward to when we were producing whiskey and putting it in bottles, and Man of Words and Man of Sword were coming to life. It was really nice to hear somebody going into the shop and saying, "Can I have a bottle of Man of Words, or can I have a bottle of Man of Sword?" Because that meant it was engaging with them and so forth. So that was a really nice experience. Sometimes we get criticised for people saying, "Well, why don't you just call it Annandale Single Malt Scotch Whisky?" Well, it is Annandale Single Malt Scotch Whisky, but there's 160 different single malt Scotch whiskies in Scotland. Ours is a bit different because of that. And so it's something I'm very keen to hang on to.
I was doing a bit of research when I came up. And one of the things that I thought was interesting was the barrels that they were matured in.
Yeah.
And of course, I know that things are matured in whiskey barrels, sherry barrels, things like that. But the size of the barrel is something very important. I read that you were saying that you don't do small casks. And I was quite interested in that, because I assumed that's what you would be looking for, very small casks.
No, you're right, cask size does matter. There's a legal limit of 700 litres. It can't be more than that. And it's a surface area of oak to volume issue. Once you go beyond 700 litres, there's just not enough oak to influence the character of the liquid inside. So the important thing is that oak does two things. It gives to the whiskey and it takes to the whiskey. It gives something of the previous occupant, which, as you mentioned, might be whiskey or bourbon or sherry or red wine or rum or something like that. It also gives vanillin, which is a breakdown product from the oak, tannins and sugars. Okay, but it also takes, and by taking I mean it absorbs compounds from the whiskey that are, you would prefer not to be there, due to the fact that usually in certain types of casks, the inside of the cask is burned to create a charred layer, highly adsorbent, increases the surface area, increases the porosity, so it lets the spirit go into the oak. So you've got these wood effects, and the wood does affect the flavour of the whiskey. And there's always a balance to be found between what we call, remember I mentioned Annandale before, that's a character that comes from our distillery, and the effect that the wood has. And what you don't want to happen is for the wood to completely overwhelm the Annandale-ness and leave it nothing behind. But you want the wood to have an effect, which brings maturity to the whiskey. So if you take a very small barrel, let's say 50 litres, you've got a very high surface area to volume of liquid ratio, and therefore you get a very quick wood effect. And the obvious sign of that, actually, is that the spirit inside the barrel goes very brown very quickly. But also, you get this huge influence of the oak, and particularly things like tannins, which can be very astringent. Yeah, so you get, and you just get what I would call oaky, woody whiskey, which I personally think is very unpleasant. So the minimum size that we will use is 200 litres. But it's not just the size. 200 litres, 230, which are called hogsheads, some 250, and some 500 litre sherry butts. But that's the kind of range that we work in. But it's not just the size of the cask that matters. It's got to do with the source of the oak, whether it's American oak or European oak. It's got very much the previous occupant and how that affects the character of the whiskey. So if you've had sherry in it, and it can have quite a profound influence quite quickly. So you've got to be careful. And also the amount of time you leave it in the cask is a huge influence. So it's all sorts of things that influence it, but the size of the cask is definitely one of them. Most Scotch whisky is matured in ex-bourbon barrels. In the US, actually, the bourbon has to be matured in virgin oak, so it can't be used twice. So what do you do with all these barrels that have been used once? Well, the Scots buy them off them. We have a particular type of cask called an STR, which is a shaved, toasted and recharred ex-Burgundy cask, and it was a style that was, it's a rejuvenated cask that was developed by Jim Swan, who we mentioned earlier. So you get Burgundy casks that are exhausted. They've matured a lot of Burgundy over the years, but now they're exhausted. So they take them apart, they shave off the inside layer, getting rid of all the exhausted oak, but not all of the wine is still penetrated beyond that, so it's still got some of that left in there. Then they take the individual staves, they toast them in an oven, and the toasting in the oven breaks down the structural components of the oak, particularly hemicellulose, into sugar, so you get a lot of sweetness from that route as well. And then they reassemble the barrel and burn the inside using a big gas flame, and that provides charring, so you get shaved, toasted and recharred. And that barrel really suits Annandale-ness. It really works well with Annandale-ness for both peated and unpeated whiskies, and we've won a lot of awards with that type of barrel. So there's a lot of tunes you can play with barrels, but the critical thing is don't overwhelm the character of the distillery, and that's where a lot of people, I think, make mistakes. If you've got something that's been in a barrel for 30 years, you can be pretty sure that it's going to be very oaky and woody, and in my opinion, it wouldn't be very nice. But I like a particular style of fresh and fruity whiskey, so there you go.
And also, another important factor for us is that we're single cask, single malt. So we taste every barrel, and it's like an apple tree. It can be full of apples, but each apple will be different in a small way. And it's the same with a batch of whiskey. So one barrel stored in the same place, made at the same time, same temperature and everything, and it has its own character. So that's why we bottle one cask at a time.
One of the nicest things, Neil, maybe you can do this if you come back another time, is you go into the bonded warehouse and we go looking for casks. We've got an idea of what we're looking for and where they will be and so forth. And then you pull the bung out and you get this thing called a phalange, which is like a great big copper pipette. You stick it in and you pull it out and you drop some whiskey into a glass, and then those involved in selecting smell it, and some of us will taste it, add a bit of water and so forth, and just appreciating it straight from the cask is a wonderful thing to do.
Oh, well, thank you very much for inviting me up to...
It's been a pleasure, yeah.
It's been absolutely fascinating.
Thank you very much, Neil. Nice to see you, and thank you for coming to see us up here in Annandale in Scotland.
And we hope to see you again.
Yeah. And the sun's come out just in time for me to leave.
Well, enjoy it, because it's quite rare.
Thank you very much, David and Teresa. And of course, thank you to Jane Brown as well. I had such a fantastic couple of days in Dumfries and Annandale. It was great to see innovation, science, history and traditions all meshing together. Now, I must also thank Kay Kingston for taking me to Browell to see where Burns took the waters in an effort to improve his health in his final weeks. Also Joe Webster for the excellent tour of the distillery, and to Abigail Wallace for organising my 2 days there. If you are living in or visiting Scotland, I do heartily recommend checking out both 1610 at the Globe and the Annandale Distillery. There are loads of links in the show notes this week. Links to the distillery, where you can also find their shop, the Globe and the 1610 restaurant, more information about David and Teresa's business, the MMR Group, plus more info on Robert the Bruce, the Robert Burns Association, and the Burns House and Museum. Okay, subscribers. There's a load of extra material for you to listen to on the Secret Podcast. There are the full interviews with Jane Brown and David Thomson and Teresa Church, plus more on that tour of the interior of the Globe. There's also a recording of the first part of the distillery tour with Joe Webster, where he goes into much more detail about the history of the Annandale Distillery, and we have a bit of a whisky tasting. So many darlings had to be killed for this episode so that it would be a sensible length, so please do check them out, including a section of the conversation with David and Teresa about the lengths that they go to grow produce for the restaurant. It's inspiring stuff. Now, if you have any comments, questions or queries regarding this episode, please contact me. There will be a postbag episode at the end of the 10th season. My email address is neil@britishfoodhistory.com. Or, of course, you can find me on my socials. There's information in the show notes. News time. Now, I am giving a free online talk as part of the Museum of Royal Worcester's Winter Talk series. It's at 6 p.m. on the 4th of March 2026, and it is called Sugar, Slavery and Empire and the Evolution of Worcester Porcelain Sucreries. And I'm giving the talk with Paul Crane, who, I'm sure you remember, came on the podcast last season to talk with me about the first 100 years or so of Worcester porcelain. There'll also be a recipe for toad in the hole appearing on the main blog pretty soon, plus a post on Neil Cooks Grigson. They're few and far between these days. But it's time to go. I do hope you've enjoyed these 2 special episodes. The podcast will return properly in the spring. In the meantime, please leave positive reviews and rate the podcast on your favourite podcast app so that the podcast can be discovered by more people. If you can support the podcast and blog financially, I would be eternally grateful. You can donate a one-off virtual coffee or pint, or start up a monthly £3 subscription to receive access to the Secret Podcast and receive all sorts of other benefits, including a monthly newsletter. Go to britishfoodhistory.com and click on the Support the Blog and Podcast tab, where you can find out all about the benefits of becoming a subscriber. The mixing and sound engineering were done by Thomas Dinas of The Delicious Legacy. Check out his stocking filler episodes that he put out over Christmas. Loads of recipes for a whole range of things, including octopus fritters. Right, off I go. I shall see you in the spring for season 10. Cheerio.